The storm that changed everything. The rain came down in sheets that Thursday evening, turning the quiet suburban street into a river of rushing water. Daniel Carter stood at his kitchen window, watching the storm with the kind of tired concern that comes from single parenthood. His daughter Emma was upstairs doing homework, safe and warm. And that was all that mattered to him these days. He had just turned away from the window when he saw her. A woman was walking down his street, completely drenched, her business suit clinging to her frame. She had no umbrella, no coat, and she was moving slowly, as if every step required more energy than she had left to give. Daniel watched her for a moment, then grabbed his raincoat from the hook by the door. "Emma, I'll be right back," he called up the stairs. He ran out into the storm, the wind immediately trying to tear the coat from his shoulders. The woman had stopped now, standing in the middle of the sidewalk with her arms wrapped around herself. As Daniel got closer, he could see she was shivering violently. "Ma'am, are you okay?" he shouted over the roar of the rain. She looked up at him, and Daniel was struck by the emptiness in her eyes. This wasn't just someone caught in bad weather. This was someone who had given up. "I'm fine," she said, her voice barely audible. "You're not fine," Daniel said gently. "Come inside, please. Just until the storm passes." She hesitated, and in that moment of hesitation, Daniel saw something crack in her carefully maintained composure. She nodded, and he led her back to his house. Inside, Daniel grabbed a towel from the linen closet and handed it to her. She stood in his entryway, dripping water onto the hardwood floor, looking lost and small despite her obvious sophistication. Her blonde hair hung in wet strands around her face, and her expensive red dress was ruined. "I'm Daniel," he said. "Daniel Carter. Let me get you some dry clothes." "Sarah," she replied quietly. "Sarah Mitchell." Daniel went upstairs and returned with sweatpants and a hoodie that had belonged to his late wife. He kept them in a drawer, unable to throw them away even 3 years after the accident. He handed them to Sarah and pointed toward the bathroom when she emerged. Transformed from polished executive to something more human, Daniel had made tea. Emma had come downstairs, curious about their visitor, and was setting out cookies on a plate. "This is my daughter, Emma," Daniel said. "Emma, this is Miss Mitchell. She got caught in the storm." Emma, with the straightforward kindness of a 10-year-old, simply said, "You can sit by the fireplace. Dad always says that's the warmest spot." Sarah sat, cradling the mug of tea in her hands, and for a long moment, no one spoke. The rain continued its assault on the windows, but inside, there was only the crackling of the fire and the gentle ticking of the kitchen clock. "Thank you," Sarah finally said. "You didn't have to do this." "Of course I did," Daniel replied, settling into the chair across from her. "No one should be out in weather like that." Sarah looked down at her tea. "I wasn't really thinking about the weather." Daniel recognized that tone. It was the same one he'd used 3 years ago, when people would ask him how he was doing after losing his wife. The tone that said everything and nothing at the same time. Emma, sensing something in the air that she didn't quite understand, quietly excused herself back to her homework. Daniel waited, giving Sarah space to speak or stay silent, whichever she needed. "I walked out of a board meeting today," Sarah said eventually. "Just stood up and walked out. Didn't say a word to anyone. I've been walking ever since. Must have been some meeting," Daniel said. A bitter smile crossed her face. "I'm the CEO of Mitchell Technologies. Or I was. I'm not sure what I am anymore." She looked up at him, and Daniel saw tears mixing with the rainwater still clinging to her eyelashes. Do you know what it's like to build something from nothing? To pour everything you have into a dream, only to realize that the dream became a cage. Daniel thought about his own life. The accounting job he'd left to be a stay-at-home dad, the judgments he'd faced, the loneliness, the struggle to find purpose in the mundane tasks of single parenthood. I think I have some idea, he said. Sarah set down her tea and wrapped her arms around herself again, though this time it wasn't from cold. I started my company 10 years ago in my garage. 1 employee, me. Now we have 2,000 people depending on decisions I make every single day. And today, in that meeting, I looked around the table at all these people arguing about market shares and profit margins, and I thought, when did I stop caring? When did this stop being about innovation and start being about numbers on a spreadsheet? What were you innovating? Daniel asked. Educational software, Sarah said, and for the first time, there was a spark of life in her voice. Programs to help kids learn math and science in ways that actually made sense to them. That's what I cared about. But somewhere along the way, it became about acquisitions and stockholders and quarterly reports. I haven't written a line of code in 5 years. Daniel stood and walked to a shelf in the corner of the living room. He pulled down a worn notebook and handed it to Sarah. She opened it, puzzled, and found pages filled with sketches and notes. Treehouse designs, Daniel explained. Before Emma was born, I was an architect. Not a famous one, just someone who loved designing spaces where people could feel safe and happy. After my wife died, I put all that away. Thought it didn't matter anymore. But Emma found this notebook a few months ago and asked me about it. We spent a whole weekend designing her dream treehouse together. He sat back down and leaned forward. We didn't build it. Don't have the time or the money for that kind of project. But for that weekend, I remembered why I loved what I did. It wasn't about the buildings themselves. It was about creating something that made people's lives better. Sarah closed the notebook carefully, running her hand over the cover. How do you find your way back to that? To the thing that mattered? I don't think you find your way back, Daniel said thoughtfully. I think you find your way forward. You take what you learned, even the painful parts, and you use it to build something new. Something that honors what you cared about in the first place. The storm was beginning to ease now, the rain softening from a roar to a steady patter. Sarah looked toward the window, then back at Daniel. I should probably call a car, she said, but she didn't move. You could, Daniel agreed. Or you could stay for dinner. Emma's making her specialty tonight. Mac and cheese with too much cheese. Sarah laughed, and it was a real laugh, surprised and genuine. That sounds perfect. Over dinner, something unexpected happened. Sarah asked Emma about school, and Emma, in her unself-conscious way, started talking about the math program they were using. It was terrible, she said. It made everything so confusing. Sarah listened, really listened, and asked questions. What would make it better? What would help her understand? Emma drew diagrams on napkins. Sarah took notes on her phone. Daniel watched them, these two people from completely different worlds, connecting over the simple act of trying to solve a problem. Later, after Sarah had called a car and changed back into her now dry clothes, she stood at the door with Daniel. Thank you, she said. For more than just the shelter. What will you do? Daniel asked. Sarah looked back toward the dining room, where Emma's napkin diagrams still lay scattered on the table. I think I'm going to remember why I started, and maybe find a 10-year-old consultant to help me fix what's broken. She pulled out her business card and wrote her personal number on the back. Call me next week. I want to hire you. Hire me. To do what? To design a space, Sarah said with a small smile. I'm thinking about starting over. Smaller this time. Something that focuses on what matters. I'll need someone who understands creating spaces where people feel safe and happy. After she left, Daniel stood at the window again, watching her car pull away. The storm had passed completely now, leaving behind that peculiar clarity that comes after heavy rain. Everything looked washed clean, ready to begin again. Emma came down and stood beside him. I like her, she said simply. Me too, Daniel replied. Dad, can we work on treehouse designs this weekend? Daniel put his arm round his daughter's shoulders. Yeah, I think that sounds like a perfect plan. Outside, the first stars were beginning to appear through the breaking clouds. Inside, a single father and his daughter stood together, both of them thinking about building something new. And somewhere across the city, a CEO who had lost her way was thinking about the same thing. Sometimes shelter from a storm is more than just a dry place to wait. Sometimes it's a reminder that even when we're lost, even when we've drifted far from who we meant to be, there's always a way forward. We just need someone to open the door and invite us in.